Hey, this is Cave Cat again, here once more to bring you another episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. Today, for episode 54 of the series, it's time that I talked about another Saturday morning cartoon that aired on Fox. The last time that I reviewed such a show was when I talked about Dog City for episode 40. However, this time, the show that I'll be talking about is none other than Bobby's World. I actually briefly mentioned the show all the way back in my Garfield and Friends review, being that the show was actually produced by Film Roman in association with Howie Mandel's company Allevy Productions. The reason I say this is because the show was actually created by comedian Howie Mandel himself. Surprising, huh? Anyway, the show focuses on Bobby Generic, not generic, a 4-year-old, later 5-year-old, then 6-year-old boy who often goes through life while living with his parents, Howard and Martha, and his siblings, his older brother Derek and their older sister Kelly. We're also introduced to Bobby's younger twin brothers Jake and Alex, starting with the third season, but we'll get to that in a bit. Also, this may come as a surprise to you, but other than the fact that the show was created by Howie Mandel, Mandel himself actually provided the voices of both Bobby and his father Howard. The reason for the former is because Mandel explained that he created Bobby's voice by accident after choking on a piece of cake. Isn't it strange yet interesting how characters or voices can be created by the most unlikely of incidents? But anyway, other than Bobby and his family, we also get other characters in the show, such as Roger, the family dog who is loyal and friendly to Bobby, Uncle Ted, who's basically the cool uncle who Bobby really likes hanging out with a lot, Jackie, a girl who is the same age as Bobby and always gives him advice, along with always kissing him, which Bobby naturally is disgusted by, Meeker and Snurd, two guys who are always doing various jobs around town, and many other characters. Another thing regarding the show is that it actually has a few similarities with that of Calvin and Hobbes, being that the main character is shown to have an overactive imagination, while also having a tendency to take a lot of phrases that his family or other people around him say very literally. However, unlike Calvin, at least Bobby is more willing to learn from his mistakes and experiences whenever he messes up, compared to Calvin's insistence on not learning anything from what he does. In fact, speaking of Bobby's imagination, sometimes we're also treated to Bobby interacting with some of his toys whenever he needs advice. His favorite toys are a doll of his favorite superhero, Captain Squash, who, as his name implies, is an anthropomorphic superhero Squash, a stuffed spider named Webley, and a multicolored teddy bear just named Teddy Bear. Creative name, huh? In some cases, it's fun to watch Bobby go on all sorts of adventures in his imagination, while other times, there are times where a lot of his literal interpretations of various phrases and figures of speech can actually come across as being bizarre or off putting to some people. But at least they don't go too far that the show ends up being unwatchable. And as for the show itself, I actually remember watching it a lot of times in the morning when I was younger, but after rewatching it a while back, it doesn't quite hold up as well as it did back when it first aired in the 1990s. There are some episodes that I remember standing out to me as a kid, such as the episode where Bobby and his family were preparing to move to a new house in order to have enough room for the new baby that Martha was about to have. And that's where I should talk about the changes that the show went through. Starting with the second season episode 3 Kids and a Baby, Bobby and the rest of the family end up learning that Martha is about to have a new baby, with the rest of the second season and most of the third season focusing on Martha's pregnancy. It's very rare to see an animated kids show focus on a pregnant character because not very many shows these days do that now. In fact, the third season is where we're introduced to Bobby's new younger siblings, Jake and Alex, to which at this point is when I think the show officially went off the jumping point, as well as making use of the cousin Oliver trope, which, for those of you who don't know, is when a TV show, whether it's animated or live action, introduces a brand new character in an attempt to try and rake in some ratings, often to little or no success. Especially since the trope was actually named after Cousin Oliver from the Brady Bunch, who ended up appearing in the final season. But back to Bobby's World. Other episodes I remember are the one where Bobby decides to start his own club with some of his friends, while also having to decide whether or not to let a new kid named Rodney join due to his eccentricities. One where Bobby learns about the importance of music from a kindly crossing guard, one where Bobby spends the night with the kid who claims to be Bobby's biggest fan, but ends up making trouble for Bobby and leaving him to take the blame for his own misdeeds. Then there's also the episode where Bobby has to prove that a friend of his did not hit Martha with a dirt clump, despite what Martha insistently believed. In those episodes, it proves that sometimes you just need to deal with the various hardships that come your way throughout life. Another thing I should point out about the show is that at the beginning and end of every episode, Bobby will end up interacting with Howie Mandel himself. It's sort of a Roger Rabbit effect. You know, where Mandel was a live action figure appearing in an animated background while interacting with the equally animated Bobby. However, when the show first premiered back in 1990, the strangest thing is that Mandel started out in live action with Bobby referring to him as Dad, before Mandel would then turn into Bobby's dad Howard, which implies that Mandel is actually Bobby's dad. But as the episodes went on, this ended up getting abandoned in favor of Bobby just referring to Mandel by his first name, with no indication of Mandel turning into Howard, which I think made the show rather inconsistent in some cases. Now, for my thoughts on the show, I actually did enjoy it when I was younger, but now that I'm older, after rewatching it, I found it just okay. I mean, yeah, some parts of it are amusing. Some running gags of the show being another character mispronouncing the family name as generic instead of generic, and Bobby or another family member correcting them, Bobby reacting with disgust whenever Jackie kisses him, and Uncle Ted giving Bobby noogies no matter the occasion. It's a wonder that the show actually ended up surpassing Garfield and Friends as the longest running Saturday morning series, with Garfield and Friends running for 7 seasons, while Bobby's World actually ran for 8 seasons. But despite this, I still found the show to be just okay, even in spite of all this. As mentioned before, the only things holding the show back are how some characters like Derek are just huge jerks to Bobby and don't really show any remorse for what they've done. Some of Bobby's literal interpretations of various phrases or figures of speech coming across as straight up uncanny valley, and also the fact that the segments with Bobby interacting with Howie Mandel just became inconsistent in the later episodes. Though regarding that last part, it's what TV Tropes refers to as early installment weirdness, where a TV show, whether it's live action or animated, introduces a plot device or character trait that never shows up again as the show goes on. However, despite the fact how exceedingly mediocre this show is, there's one thing about it that can really get a lot of people pumped up: the theme song. That is just the catchiest theme song of any TV show that anyone has ever heard, because it's actually composed by John Tesh. Yes, the John Tesh, who had a strong career as a musician, composer, and keyboardist. In fact, a lot of you might actually remember him for composing Round Ball Rock, the theme for NBA on NBC. But other than that, it's just your standard slice of life show, and it actually gets 7.5 stars from me. Even though I find this show much more enjoyable and tolerable than Calvin and Hobbes, I still find it to be rather meh in my opinion. And in regards to shows that were produced by Film Roman, this has to be the strangest, but not as strange and bizarre as that of the Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat, thankfully, but it still doesn't really hit the mark like Garfield and Friends or even Mother Goose and Grimm did. Kinda surprising that I would actually go that far to compare the show to Mother Goose and Grimm. And also, when it comes to animated shows that have been created by celebrities, most of them tend to be rather hit and miss, being that they'll either win over audiences depending on the concept or end up alienating a lot of people just because of how strange or out there the premise is. Even Camp Candy ended up going into that pitfall, even in spite of John Candy creating and starring in it. And from what I heard, Little Rosie was also reviled by a lot of people, especially regarding the controversy surrounding Roseanne Barr, even during her tenure on Roseanne. But as for Bobby's World, I find the show to be a mixture of harmless entertainment and uncanny valley material. And there has been word of Howie Mandel making an effort to revive the show, but nothing really came of that. And besides, even if Mandel ever does revive the show, it's uncertain if it'll actually bring in a new audience or if it'll end up turning off a lot of people. As I mentioned before, the show hasn't really aged all that well, and Bobby himself hasn't been seen on television for years after the show ended in 1998 and began airing in reruns on Fox Family until 2001, other than when he made a surprise appearance in a 2000 episode of Deal or No Deal. But other than that, it doesn't seem like we'll be seeing any more Bobby Generick for a long time. Well, anyway, that's a wrap with this episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. As mentioned before, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell for more videos from me. So until next time, see you in the future!